3rd of December 1990, there was an event that happened. And it happened that there was a black sister who was welcome, and a couple of people were also welcomed. People were trying to discuss important topics that the society really needs to look into, that the society really needs to talk about. These were so important because these were the problem that black people were going through during those times. And this was a forum that black people and white people were allowed to come and talk about these topics. The host was known as Phil Donahue, a really, really important podcast that black people debated with white people, all different races debated and talked about this. It was really, really important. The shows that happened during the 90s, I know I wasn't born, but trying to follow up with time. This time, who was invited? Sister Soldier was invited. She calls herself an African American. Yes, she calls herself an African American because, according to her, she traces her roots back in Africa. Hold up, and I respect that we have black people who don't call themselves African American, but Black American or brown people, indigenous people of America, right? I know that. Cool. Now, why am I addressing Sister Soldier as an African American? One is because of respect, because she identified as an African American, right? That's why I'm calling her due to respect. I won't call her a Black American because she didn't call herself that. It as much as some people might look or some people might see that she is that. Okay, we are cool with that. Now, there is an important topic that she discusses about. Very, very important that I think that we need to talk about. And she discusses about racial equality. She discusses about systemic oppression, black self-determination, amongst other things that you and I need to talk about. Guys, I want us to watch this video. I'll be back with my commentary, a really, really important topic that I hope that we always need to talk about these times. Just a request, you could like the video, maybe share, subscribe the channel if the content will please you or something. You can also consider buying me tea or buying me coffee on my Cash App account. Yep, I really, really appreciate, most definitely appreciate. So guys, let's buckle up for this video. I'll be back with my commentary. These are presented Gindex Stories. Until then, let's dive right into the
white people don't deal with the fact that they are the ones who are sicker than anybody else in this particular issue, which is why when you deal with the question of race, you cannot deal with what's wrong with these African people. See, the thing that happened in South Central started with a malady in the justice system where white people could not see white men who had did something against black men and penalize them for what everybody in this country knows that they did. So the problem of white racism is that we don't look in depth and do these little documentaries on white people and what's wrong with them.
I think that there have been gains for individual people, but we as African people, as a collective, have not moved forward as we should. And most of the time, the African people that you have that are able to occupy the positions of mayors and governors do not occupy it forcefully and forthrightly for the collective of African people in this country. And as a result, what you have is millions of young African and Latino children and youth who are in a state of total chaos, who don't have skills and don't have any idea how they're going to develop their skills, and are estranged from even the adults in their own race because of the problem of not dealing with white racism and the real impact that it has on their lives.
I'd like to add to that. The professor, the president, John Silver, said that one of the problems with the programs of the 60s was that they did not provide corrective measures to help the black family. We need to understand that when black people were brought here to the United States, they were brought here as an act of war. They were kidnapped here, and the destruction of the black family and the creation of a slave mentality was an integral part of the development of this nation state. So there has never been an interest in the black family, and that's reflected today. But even more, every city in which we have aspired to so-called political power. In Newark, black males are being murdered by the Newark Police Department under the guise that they're robbing cars. When we look at New York City, the police riot in the streets. When we look at LA, there was a riot in the streets. All of these cities have black mayors. Yeah. So we have to begin to understand that moving black people up the economic ladder does not necessarily mean that black people on the bottom of the economic ladder are going to be empowered, because there are black people who identify with the system so much that they are self-hating Negroes.
Mr. Bin Wahad, you seem to be going kaboom to the entire white community. Do we have from you a spirit of belief that there really are out there in America white folks who do not suffer from the pathology that Sister Soldier reminds us does exist in this country?
But why is that the question? In other words, it's the same as when you're dealing with the issue in South Africa. People say, well, if black people get in control of that government, what will they do with the white people who are living there? Why is that the question? Can we refocus the question
I'd like to
as
explain
to
my
how we're
question.
going to correct?
Let me have a moment to defend my question. Okay. If you believe that all people who are white are interested in pillaging, reminding us, as you painfully do, of our own history.
No, that's a mischaracterization. That's a mischaracterization. And first of all, it's the mischaracterization because the Constitution was established by white males with property. It said all men are created equal. Right. And they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. It didn't say women were created equal with men. And the Bill of Rights was attached to the Constitution because people without property had no rights. So I did not say that all white people are interested in burning and looting and pillaging. I am saying that the ideals that established this country were based on burning, looting, and pillaging people's land.
Accept your point, and you concede to us that in contemporary society, we do have honorable people of all colors who have as much of an interest in the salvation of their babies as...
But the problem with that, Phil, is that the people of good intentions in the white community are the minority. They do not stand on principle, and they do not struggle against their own racism and white skin privilege. See, the problem is this. It's like men who say, I understand how you feel as a woman being subjected to sexist behavior.
They can't possibly.
Not without interacting with women and empowering them.
Bill, the problem, though, I think, with this whole analysis, as I see it, we're talking, and I have great respect for the Constitution, but let's be frank, it was not based upon an idealistic view of human beings. Mm-hmm. Daruba doesn't realize that I think sometimes that what he's saying as a description of not white people, but all people, was in fact the foundation of America's political philosophy. People are greedy, give them a chance, they'll beat you up. Give them a chance, they'll kill you, rape you,
that's
rob
not what
you.
Is saying.
That was exactly, if I may say so, the view of human beings, not just white human beings, but most human beings.
Have we moved somewhat off this animalistic, primitive?
The point is, however, that the point that I think I hear, at least, of what Sister Soldier says and others say, has less to do, we talk about all this economic redistribution and so forth. Let's talk about the basic issue of politics. The basic issue of politics is power. If you have power over me, you're going to abuse it. If I have no power to resist you, then I'm going to be abused. And I don't care what's in your heart. I don't want to know what's in your heart half the time. I want to know whether there's a weapon in your hand and whether I have the means to defend myself against it. Could be economic, could be social, could be political, could be physical, but I've got to be able to defend myself because I can't trust you. And that's an American statement. That is not a statement of some idealism.
There is no human soul to be found anywhere?
That's not the point. The point is that if you give people power over you and you can't defend yourself against them, our founders said they will abuse you. And the world, if I don't mind saying so, from a black person's point of view, I don't have to prove to you that somebody's out to get me. There are 400 years of history in this country that people are out to get me, and they got me more than half the time. I don't have to prove that to anybody.
Jonathan Kozol, whose seminal book, Death at an Early Age, was a personal account of his own experience of teaching 4th grade in the community of Roxbury, the minority community within the city of Boston. Mr. Kozol, you've been patient, sir. What are your thoughts as you listen in on our dialogue?
Well, I didn't think I'd ever agree with Alan Keyes on anything, but I sure agree with what he just said. I started teaching, as you know, in a segregated school in the mid-'60s. Today, inner city schools everywhere are more segregated and less equal than they were at the time I set out as a teacher. Inner city kids I see all over the country are in squalid, ugly, filthy, overcrowded buildings in which not one of us would willingly spend 1 hour. Their lives are more miserable today than they were when I began. By any kind of statistics, I won't drown you in statistics, but there's one which is so devastating, I have to cite it here. As you know, Phil, tracking has come back into schools again. It's become a sort of fashionable way of segregating kids within a single school. Black children, statistically, are 3 times as likely to be tracked into so-called special classes for the retarded as white children, but only half as likely to be put into gifted programs. That is an intolerable statistic in a democracy. And anybody who looks at that and all the other statistics, the fact that black infant mortality is twice that of white children, anyone who looks at those kinds of statistics, or a recent news event, black Haitians being brutally excluded from this country while white Europeans are welcomed at New York International Airport. Anyone who looks at that knows in their heart that racism remains the central moral agony of this society.
Yeah. So my pleading to Mr. Bin Wahad and to Dr. Keyes in the white liberal tradition of, gee, you don't totally dislike us, do you, is a rather empty
I'll
kind
tell
of...
you why I think it is, Phil, because not to criticize you, naturally, I'd like to feel, you know, I'm a nice guy, I hope black people will like me, but that's wasted energy. The issue isn't whether they like you and me or not. The issue is whether they have an even shot in this society,
agree,
and they
sir.
can't afford to worry about our injured feelings.
Yes,
And
I
they
ask for
shouldn't
only
waste
one
time.
moment to defend the question. If the anger is that overwhelming and the evidence supported by your scholarship makes clear their positions, then we have to wonder whether we should even waste any more energy with this ideal of integration and living together and cooperating. I ask you not because I'm an insecure person who wants to be loved. I have children who must live in the society.
Dr. Edwards is the one who spoke eloquently to the point, and that is America herself. America herself will not survive in the 21st century unless she comes to tap into the diversity that is hers and stop pursuing this kind of divisive policy. This is more of a threat to the future of America than anything ever posed by the old USSR. We will explode from within unless we all understand we have a stake in this system. And that's the compelling issue, not whether we like each other, not whether we love each other, not whether it ever started out right, not whether we should be angry with anybody. We won't survive unless we understand we're in it together.
Appreciate very much your comments, Mayor Kelly, and I promise I shall not, for the rest of the program, ask any member of this audience or panel whether they like me. Please welcome Anna DeVere Smith is the performing artist who is responsible for a much-discussed, much-heralded one-woman show titled Fires in the Mirror. You wanted to say, Miss Smith.
Well, I wanted to say something about the fact of who's together here in this issue of race. And it's kind of startling to me that we are looking at the issue of race still in black and white, especially since we watched these fires of Los Angeles burn, and it's clear that the story is much more complex than black and white. There are Latinos involved in the story. There are Asian Americans who were taking matters to themselves and standing on roofs with their own guns. So that the dialogue that we had before we decide whether we like white people or not, I think we have to begin to develop strategies and techniques for negotiating our differences over a very broad canvas. And this is going to mean the life and death of many of us. I've worked in the New York City public schools and seen the speed and dispatch with which a naughty boy quickly becomes a retarded boy. It's simply a matter of taking him out of the class on the wrong day and putting him in another class.
What we're talking about here is very clear. If you look at Latin America today, in every society in Latin America, and Latin America is essentially a conglomeration of European settler states. The conquistadores went in there and did the same thing that the English did here and everything, right? When we look at the compositions of these societies, we see that at the top are light-skinned descendants of conquistadores, and at the bottom are native people and black descendants of Africans. White skin privilege is a European ideal and concept that was exported with their economic system, their religious philosophy, and it was exported and imposed on people of color. So when we talk about Latinos, let's understand what we're saying here. We're talking about Latinos who, for the most part, have African blood in them, and they have internalized racism just like everybody else. When we look at Asian Americans, many of the Asians that came here initially came to work the railroads. They were treated like dogs. They were treated like dirt. But when we see a lot of Asians that come to the United States today, one of the first words they learn in their lexicon, one of the first things that they learn is nigger. The United States' major contradiction around the issue of race is white-skinned male privilege. And if we don't attack that, if we don't analyze that, if we don't begin to deal with that, then we got a problem. And I totally disagree with the mayor of Washington, because I do not have a stake in saving a racist nation. I do not have a stake in maintaining American hegemony over people of color around the world. I do not have an interest in maintaining this system that causes the miseries of billions of people one more moment.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to walk away from our investment in this country and the suffering that we've had in this country since 1619. We gave this country her culture. We gave this country her music. We gave this country her margin of profit with the agricultural revolution, though we never got our 40 acres and a mule. I'll be doggone if I'm walking away from 4 centuries of investment in this country. We, too, are entitled to a piece of the rock. I don't care how wrong America was.
May I call this audience, may I please, we must move on.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I just hope that you're doing fine wherever you are today. Now, Sister Soldier's argument and that American system politically, economically and socially was built on the exploitation and dehumanization of black people. This ties into the historical concepts that I want us to look into, because we can't just talk about systemic operations without including this part of history that I want us to consider, or maybe reconsider if you know. Go back to history. Check things like chattel slavery, which happened in 1619 to 1865. Check out things like Jim Crow laws, Check out the Great Migration of redlining, which happened still 1916s to 1970s. Also check the war on drugs, which happened in 1971 to present day. Check on black self-determination and empowerment, the Marcus Garvey and the Black African movement. So much important topics that we need to look into, that we need to talk about. I hope you are okay that we need to start and we need to go try look through this. And now I'm going to beginning by talking about chattel slavery, which happened in 1619 to 1865. The foundation of American economy was built on the forced labor of enslaved Africans. You know that. Enslavement was justified by laws and ideologies that framed black people as property, inferior, and deserving of subjugation. Sister Soldier echoes of this dehumanization in modern systems, including the prison industrial complex and racial profiling by law enforcement. Right? So just trying to look at this, just trying to talk about this. We are also going to see things like Jim Crow laws, which happened in 1817 to 1965. After slavery, legalized segregation and systemic disenfranchisement perpetuated racial inequality. Black Americans were denied voting rights, equal education, and access to resources, which, as Soldier argued, continued through redlining, school segregation, and mass incarceration. So important part of Sonia Massey's argument that she talked about, that I think that we need to we need to go through them, which is really, really important. I'm also going to be talking about economic disenfranchisement. Soldier emphasizes that Black Americans and marginalized community are disproportionately affected by poverty and lack of economic opportunities. Now, what does this connect with? This connects with the Great Migration and Redlining, 1916 to 1970s. Black people moved from from the south to north cities in search of better jobs and opportunities. However, they were often confined to impoverished neighborhoods due to redlining, a practice in which banks and the government refused mortgages, right, to people in predominantly black areas. I want you to think about this as something which is really, really important. Black people don't own a lot of property because of redlining. And this was done perfectly by the government. Now, another thing, war on drugs, which happened in 1971 till present day, it's still happening, right? Till present day, it's still happening. Now, Soldier likely referenced how the war on drugs disproportionately targeted black communities, leading to mass incarceration and economic instability. The concept ties into an argument about how laws and policies were designed to suppress black empowerment and economic mobility. Now, she also talked about something which is really, really important. She talked about black self-determination and empowerment, one of the most topics that people need to look into, one of the most topics that people need to talk about. Now, Marcus Garvey and the Back to Africa movement, 1910 to 1920. Marcus Garvey advocated for black pride, self-sufficiency, and rejection of white supremacy. Soldier echoed these ideas by calling for black communities to develop their own economic and educational institution, akin to Garvey's push for African unity and economic independence. I'm also going to be talking about Black Power movement that's happened in 1960 to 1970s. Leaders like Stokely Carmichael, and Malcolm X also emphasized the importance of black self-determination, arguing that black Americans should control their own politics and economic future rather than just relying on system that was built on the exploitation. Soldiers' rhetoric was a contribution to this tradition. I'm also going to be talking about white privilege and silence. Soldier pointed out that many white Americans benefited from the systems of privilege but remained silent on issues of racial injustice. And this can be understood through these ways. The concept of whiteness as a property. Legal scholar Cherry Harris argued that in America, being white has historically been a form of social, political, economic, and capital. This idea connects to Soldiers' argument that white America often protected their privileged status, whether consciously or unconsciously, through silence or complicity in maintaining systems that oppress black people. The civil rights movements, that is the 1950s to 1960s. Many white liberals supported moderate reforms, but often remained silent on more radical demands of systemic change, such as those voiced by Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party. Soldier drew attention to the historical patterns of silence, calling for white Americans to actively confront their complicity and maintain racial inequality. Now, the need for racial change. This is what Sister Soldier tried to talk about. She tried to talk about, Soldier argued that Soldier argument was not just about reform, but the need for radical change. A statement reflected in, now, this statement is reflected in the following. Frantz Fanon writing on decolonization, Fanon argued that true liberation for colonized or oppressed people requires dismantling the structures of power, not merely reforming them. Sister Soldier similarly argued that the US needed a fundamental shift in its power dynamics, echoing the idea that the oppressed must seize control of their own destiny. Civil rights to black power shifts, that's in 1965 to 1975, while early civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. sought integration. Later movements like Black Power call for racial radical recognition of society to address not just legal inequality but economic and social disparities. Soldiers' argument followed this tradition, stressing that reforms was not enough without deep systemic change. I hope that this show was really, really great. I hope that this show was really, really important to us. Was really, really important to us to show us that our sisters, especially for the young youth who are watching this video, they could act as an example. These are the people that could act as their role models to shape, to share this information to the entire black community and the entire global black community. These are presented Jintic Stories, and until then, peace, love, and harmony. If you're watching this video for the first time, I most definitely ask you to subscribe the channel, to join the membership, to you can buy me a coffee if you don't mind through my Cash App account, which is on my bio. And until then, let's meet on my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.